Hello again, this is Brandy Weaver with Darlington County First Steps and Countdown to Kindergarten program. Today to talk about what we do the last two visits of the program during the summer, visits 5 and visit 6. On visit 5, we go over social studies skills and some writing skills. This is a good time for us to talk about the social studies standards that we have with the children's parents and go over some writing ideas and things that are important in writing, along with some misconceptions that parents may have about writing with their 5-year-old child. To begin with, we read this book. They get the hardback book of this. This is Howard B. Wigglebottom Learns to Listen. And as you can imagine from the illustration on the front, this is about a little bunny who's in school, who has a hard time being still, who has a hard time listening, has a hard time following the rules. So when we read this story, we talk about maybe different times that we've had a hard time paying attention or we've had a hard time listening, try to make the child feel like this story relates to them in different situations. We take this book and what we do is we relate it to rules and consequences. And this is a good time for the teacher to talk to the child about some rules that we may have in the classroom or that we may have in the school that the child may not be familiar with. It's not meant as a time to scare the child or be real firm and enforcing, this is what we do, this we don't want to intimidate them at all, but we want to go ahead and let them know some of the rules that we have at school and kind of reflect upon them and maybe even see how they relate to rules that the child may have at home. So after we read this book, like I said, we talk about some of the social studies standards that it hits. We talk about rules and consequences and what that means. Why do you have a consequence to a rule? Why do you need consequences? That elaborates out into the social studies standards of talking about different jobs that people have. This could lead to discussion about maybe how a teacher has to enforce rules, but that's why our local police departments have to enforce rules. That's why the state has rules that we have to follow, the highways, etc., so that people are doing what they need to do to keep others safe. And that is something that we tell the child. Rules are there to keep us safe. It's not to be mean. It is to keep us safe. So after we read this story and we talk about different situations, we kind of merge this into our emergent writing lesson. And we began to talk about how the child's exposure to writing correlates with their reading. Many parents don't understand that when a child begins to write, a lot of times they write letters backwards. That does not mean that they're dyslexic. It means that they just are forming the letters with their motor skills to the best of their abilities. So we talk about the different stages of writing. We also talk about how when children write, they're going to write what they hear. And a lot of times in our language, words are not written the way that they sound. That's why it's harder for a child to learn how to read, because we had these little tricks. We had these little rules in our English language that are different from learning all the letter sounds. So what we begin to do is we talk about how writing forms in stages with our students. In the beginning, writing may be drawing a picture. But if the child can tell me what the picture is about, can stay on topic and tell me what they are trying to express in their writing, that is the first stage of writing. It may look like scribble. It may just look like a little stick person. It may just, to a parent, it may not look like much at all. But to a teacher, once you sit down and talk to the child and conference with the child and the child tells you what the picture is, then you would begin to elaborate on that. So as we're talking about writing, we're going to start talking about what is a topic. A topic is what you're going to write about, and you need to stay on topic. You can't just decide to change to another topic in the middle of your writing, because just like when I'm reading a story to the children or read aloud, I tell them it talks about something, it tells us a story. We don't just have something just thrown in there that makes no sense. So when you're writing, you're actually the author. So what you need to write makes sense. So since we read about rules and consequences with Wigglebottom, we talk about, well, then let's pick the topic of a rule for our first writing. All right, let's talk about rules. What are some rules you have in your house? Of course, the child's going to tell you different things. So parents may tell you some things that the child's really not comfortable sharing about rules that they have in the house. I can do this, I can't do that, or if I do this, then this happens. But we talk about rules that are in the home. And then the children are given their own dry erase board. It's magnetic and dry erase, so that if they were to have some of those magnetic letters, they could use it to spell with also. We give them an eraser and a dry erase marker. So they can write on this first if you would like. Of course, they love this and they love to erase. They're going to want to sit there and play with it a little bit. They're going to want to explore with it. That's perfectly okay. But you just tell them that you use the only dry erase markers on this board, just like you would in your classroom, because if you write with it with a regular marker, it's not going to come off. Then what you can do is elaborate on the rules in your house. After you've drawn pictures and talked about it on the dry erase board, the child can gets their own journal. Now, when we write in kindergarten, often, paper looks something like this sometimes. Sometimes it will have a box at the top and it might have 2 lines down at the bottom, because the illustrations and the writing that the child does needs to relate, needs to correlate to each other. And like I said in the beginning, a lot of times the writing is just a picture. So we show them the space for the picture. We show them the writing at the bottom, the lines. Again, just like we did with reading, we can talk about left to right, how we come down to the next line. This is a good time for if the child's ready for it. If you see that they're already doing the beginning stages of writing, talking about a sentence beginning with a capital letter, ends with punctuation, go ahead and introduce those finger spaces in between words and explain to them, show them. You write it yourself on a piece of paper. Write a bunch of words without any spaces and say, we can't read this. This doesn't make sense. We need spaces in between words so that we can tell where a word begins and where a word ends. But in this lesson, a good thing to do is to write about some good rules. Now, first, I like to ask them, what are some good rules that you think we would need in a kindergarten classroom? What are some good rules that you think we may need on the playground? What are some good rules that you may think we need when we're going to the cafeteria or to the gym? And just kind of get them started thinking about rules that they have at the house that sometimes may be a good idea for rules at school. We want them to feel as safe at school as they feel at home. So the more correlation that you make between the two, the more comfortable the child is going to be. So then again, like I said, we would talk about, okay, what's a good rule? Can you show me? Can you draw me? And then help them sound it out. Remember, when the child is writing at this stage, they're not going to spell the words correctly. They're going to spell the words the way that they hear it. That is okay. It is perfectly okay. And the more the child learns high frequency words, the more they'll just write those words rather than spell them out. But they're just beginning kindergarten, so more often than not, they're not going to know how to already write those words. In some cases, they may know some basic ones that they've seen, or that they can read off of little programs that they've done at home with their iPads or something that they've watched on TV, but you sound the words out. Now, we need to make sure that when we're doing the writing lesson with them, that we explain to the child, this is a form of communication. When you write, you are communicating ideas. And you are writing when you write a story, when you write a letter, if you write a card, if somebody gives a birthday card. When I make my list every time I go to the store, I'm communicating. I'm writing to myself what I need to get. To-do list, agendas, any of those things, so that they can see that there's writing all around us. Writing is not just something that I do in isolation. Writing is a concept that I need to understand and I need to be able to do. It's a lifelong skill that I have to be able to do. So we talk about the different forms of communication. We also talk about the different stages again with the parents. They say this is a beginning stage. Now, the more they write, the better they will be. And we always want to correlate how those illustrations match those words, because good readers use pictures in their stories to figure out the words in the text. That is very important to a small child, because if they get to a word and they're not sure what it is, one of the first things that we tell them to look at the beginning sound, but we also tell them, look at the picture. That is an indication or a hint to you of what the story is about. That's why the pictures are there. So when they're writing their stories, their pictures should also match their writing. We will also talk about here, when we're talking about the rules at home and in the classroom, and when we're getting ideas from our students that we're working with Countdown to Kindergarten. Okay, now when we start school, I'm going to need you to be one of those children who shows the other children the rules of the classroom. So if we've decided that one of our rules is going to be, we're going to raise our hand before we speak, we're not going to scream out, we're going to raise our hand and wait for the teacher to call on us to say something, then when we go to school and I go over this with the class and you're there, since you and I have already talked about it, you're going to be one of the ones that the other children are going to be watching. So you're actually somebody who's going to make an influence on your peers or your classmates because you already know some of the rules. Again, you're making the child feel so comfortable and they feel like the star student whenever they come into the classroom because you're dependent on them to show the other children what they need to be doing. So this visit 5 is just incorporating social studies and writing together, talking about rules at home and at school, but also how writing is used with the child to express ideas, to stay on topic. And again, they get the book, they get the board, they get the journal, they get the pencils, they get a big pencil, fat pencil, and they get the regular size pencil. They also get a pencil sharpener, they get their marker, all of that with lesson 5. At the end, as always, the parent gets a handout. It talks about the different stages of writing so that they can look at it, and we discuss any questions or any ideas that the child may have. They get their handout. Again, we want to make sure we're staying on our timeline chart. We fill out visit 5, any comments or questions that the family may have, and then we get ready for visit 6. Now, visit 6 is the last visit in our Countdown to Kindergarten program.